I'm Jonquel Neal.
And I'm Jacqueline Bunn. And welcome to Legally Speaking. This show is being brought to you by the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, also known as GABWA. GABWA is a voluntary bar association that seeks to empower our communities and advocate for women and children. This series of shows on Legally Speaking is going to focus on attorney advocacy. We want to provide some shows that will really help our membership.
Yes, and we are so excited to bring you the topic today of how to run a political campaign and win. We have two very special guests for you today. We have political strategist Howard Franklin, and we also have attorney as well as political strategist Kevin Ross. If you, at any particular time in your career, are looking to run for office, whether that's at a state or local level, and even on a higher playing field, these two are here, and we plan to bring you all the necessary steps and information that you'll need to be successful.
Okay, so we can start with you. How did you get involved in becoming a political strategist?
Like a lot of people, I got involved through volunteering. Volunteer for a nonprofit that happened to have been founded by a former politician, and just being a member of his coterie and his circle, met lots of others who were either serving in office or interested in serving in office. And the opportunity presented itself to help one of those candidates win a seat on the Atlanta City Council, and we were successful, and I was kind of off to the races after that.
Okay, you got bitten.
Bitten by the bug, as they say, that's right.
All right, and Mr. Ross, what about you?
Same thing, civic volunteerism. I wanted to be active in the community, and one of the ways I chose to do that was to start volunteering in political campaigns. And over time, I got asked to take more and more responsibility in different campaigns, and the next thing I knew, I was running campaigns. So it exactly came out of volunteerism.
Awesome. So when individuals are seeking to run for office, what are some of the preliminary things or factors that they should consider before running?
Especially for first-time candidates, I like to make sure they understand the time requirements and oftentimes the financial requirements to be a candidate. When you're just hitting the campaign trail and you haven't quite gotten the momentum to be the front runner, get close to that general election date, oftentimes you are using your own free time and spare time to put together that campaign, interview folks, get out and meet people in the community, and oftentimes you're coming out of your own pocket to start the initial building blocks for that campaign. And so I think it's really important, again, especially for first-timers who don't have that long track record, who don't have a long list of donors lined up, to be prepared to commit a sizable amount of time and sometimes money as well.
And would you like to add to that, Mr. Ross?
Well, I think it's important to understand the legal requirements. In Georgia, you have to register a campaign committee. You need to recruit people to play certain roles in that committee. You need to start accounting for any money that you receive or any money that you spend. You have to file a declaration of intent to accept campaign contributions. If you run for a federal office, I can tell you the requirements are very, very strict and very rigid, and you really almost have to engage someone to work with you to help you understand what you have to do to be able to comply with all of those federal laws. But there is a legal component that a first-time candidate needs to get a hold of, and they may need to get assistance with that, but it's very important to get the campaign organized properly at the beginning.
And that financial piece is a critical piece, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What kinds of things do you end up expending on when you're running a campaign?
Sure. I think Kevin made a great point. Having really experienced advisors in the places where you can't afford to make mistakes, i.e. the legal aspects, as you're qualifying, as you're intaking dollars and spending dollars is terribly important. I've been lucky, and a lot of the candidates that I've worked with who've either hailed from the legal field or had lots of friends who were themselves attorneys who've been able to be helpful and volunteer in many ways. I would tell you the largest expenditure typically is paid communications for campaigns, right? It's whether you're putting your money into direct mail that's going to mailboxes, into telephones and text messages that go to tens of thousands of voters, on the radio or on television, broadcast or cable. I mean, when you're producing and distributing a message that you really want to hone and want people to think of as memorable and convincing and persuasive, I think the rule of thumb is that about 2/3 of the dollars you raise should go to direct voter contact, and that's oftentimes broadcast media.
Okay. What about marketing? do you need a marketing person to put together your campaign? Because I've seen some campaigns that are very polished looking, some not so, but how critical is that?
I'm sure Kevin can jump in here and offer plenty of expertise. I'll say, marketing is one of those places that it's tough to qualify who you're working with, right? I think the most times folks really focus on the speciality of how the message is being distributed. So you might have someone who's producing and scripting your television ads. That might be someone different than who's producing your direct mail. It might be someone who's different than is producing a website or a piece of collateral for you. But at the end of the day, you do want consistency because repetition.
And continuity.
And continuity, that's an even better word. Because repetition is really what rules the day for these sorts of efforts.
When you talk a little bit about whether or not having different individuals work in different portions of the marketing piece when running a campaign, what type of position that you're running for, how does that determine or quantify the amount of people, the amount of resources that you need, and who do you go to first as a candidate? Who are the people that you need to go to first?
Well, campaigns are amazing things because they come together really on an ad hoc basis, and people emerge and participate in them, and it's a beautiful part really of American democracy. And it varies. I've been fortunate, I've run some mayor's races, and in a mayor's race in a big city, you have dozens of people. You may even have hundreds of people that are playing different roles in that campaign. Likewise, a smaller race like for a state house or a city council, you may only have a core group of 5 or 6 people that are really performing most of the functions. But ultimately, you need someone to help manage the campaign, which involves to some extent managing the candidate, someone to help with the financing and helping to raise the money, and someone to help with the messaging and the communication.
And I know we're talking a bit about money. What is a fundraising plan?
Is that one for me? Well, first rule of campaigns is if it's not written down, then it doesn't exist. We try to drill this into the heads, especially, again, for first-time candidates, because, way too often, what they know stays trapped in their heads and it isn't shared amongst the rest of the team. And not only is it important to get everyone to be on the same page, but you really need buy-in and consensus so that folks are pulling in the same direction. And the same thing is true for finance. Right, if you decide that you're seeking a state house position or a school board race, you will identify a certain number of voters you think you need in order to win, your win number. And you'll also decide, hey, this is the number of times that I'm hopeful I can put together a plan and actually touch those voters, tell them who I am, what issues I care about, the arc of my leadership that I'm offering over the course of this particular campaign. And you can't do that with any degree of certainty if you don't have a handle on how much money you can raise and when you have to actually expend it, right? One of the things, I think everyone kind of gets a sense of why it's important to know how you build a budget and how much money you ultimately hope to raise and spend. One of the things that gets overlooked way too often is that you have to know when those expenditures have to happen, because if you're going up on television or if you're buying radio, oftentimes those expenditures have to happen well before you hear your commercial on anyone's air, on anyone's television, right? So really important that you are thoughtful about the expenditures and how the dollars have to go out of the campaign as much as you are thinking about how the dollars come into the campaign.
Right, right. And I guess we back up a little bit. How do you even identify what you want to run for? What are factors and things that someone should think about? Do I want to be on a school board? Do I want to run for the commission? What are the kinds of things that candidates you worked for? What are some of the factors that they looked at in making those decisions?
I think one of the most important things is to be really familiar with what the office does. I think
Let's start there.
After the election of President Obama in 2008, there was a certain glamour, or at least perceptual or perceived glamour to politics, and a lot of people were excited about it, rightfully so, but didn't necessarily have a firm grasp of what a city council member does, what a state house member does, what a school board member does. So for me, I want my candidates to actually spend time in the jurisdictions that they're running for. I want you to go into those board meetings or city council meetings. I want you following along on the agenda and looking at the sort of issues that are being decided by that board. I want you to have a real grasp, not only of the issue set, but also of the stakeholders who are a part of the process, right? So it's easy to say, I can watch the council members on the dais and see them banging the gavel and moving legislation,
Right.
through the process. But then who do they have to talk to in order to get to, informed positions on that legislation? Who do they have to meet with? Who are their constituents? And what does an average day look like for them, right? They're not just sitting on the dais or out, talking to their constituents, addressing all sorts of issues in the community, and working with other elected officials to get things done on a regional level. So I think it's really important to have a real firm sense of what you're getting yourself into, because you don't
and
want to
what
be
the
the dog.
time commitment's
That's
going
right,
to be,
that's right.
whether it's going to be paid or unpaid.
That's right.
Those
Pay
are
very, very
things.
little.
Right. If you're looking to get rich, this is not
This
the
is
arena.
not the arena. That's right.
Not
What about
legally.
you, Mr. Ross?
Well, I've often described it as there's politics and candidates of ambition and politics and candidates of agenda.
Okay.
And generally, the best are those of agenda because they have a purpose. They have something they want to accomplish when they win a particular seat. You like to think that people will run for office who've been engaged citizens, who will follow important public issues, and that helps drive their decision to seek office. But there is also the other category where people sometimes just run because they want a seat. And they may not have given a whole bunch of thought to what the powers and responsibilities of a particular office are. And they may not have any real goal as to what they want to do. But the best candidates usually bring to the table some background, some experience, some study, and then they bring with it a certain set of goals that they want to accomplish to make public policy better for the people that they serve.
Right. I know Gadwa has a Judicial and Public Office Academy, and I think both of you have participated in that. And one of the things they talk about in the process is having sort of like an elevator speech where you are able to articulate what you plan to do and why and your goal. Could y'all talk a little bit about that? The importance of knowing why you want the office.
Absolutely. I would say I'd take it a step further. Very important that you know what the office does and why you want to be elected to it. I think the thing that, again, oftentimes gets overlooked is how your life experience, your particular set of attributes, professionally, personally, or otherwise, really contribute to you doing the most you can for that office, right? So oftentimes, especially when you've got a nonpartisan race where there's no partisan marker, right? We don't know there's no Democrat, there's no Republican. And even sometimes when you do have those races and you've got a lot of partisans on one side of the fence or the other, it's hard to distinguish sometimes for the average voter because many times we'll be talking about the same thing, right? I've been working on municipal races in the city of Atlanta for 16, 17 or so years, and you could pretty much name the topics of interest or the issues of interest from 17 years ago, and they sound a lot like they do today. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, I would be willing to bet that in many cases, competitive races, you had candidates saying a lot of the same things. To me, the real differentiator is when you can say, I care about these things and I can move the ball forward because of my life experience. And if you can wrap that into your elevator pitch, it's going to be a much more memorable and authentic pitch for voters to be both persuaded by and remember.
You got to make it personal.
That's right.
Yeah. And you talked earlier about marketing. I mean, political campaign is an marketing exercise. I mean, what's being marketed is the candidate and what the candidate message is and what they believe and what they want to advocate for. So all of the efforts in the campaign are designed to bring that message to the people in a way that will make people respond to it in a positive manner. And typically, if you're running for a high-level office, we may remember the Ted Kennedy interview many years ago when he was running for president. He couldn't seem to give a very short answer. Why? If you're running for a good, strong office, you should probably have that elevator speech. But for city council, state house, that's not so critical. The main thing is have a message, make your campaign organized in such a way that you're able to deliver that message. And as Howard said earlier, deliver it with repetition so it begins to penetrate into the voters and into the electorate.
I want to transition a little bit with the discussion and talk a little bit about how important it is for the community to know who you are. And frankly, depending on what office, you do intend to run for, when is the proper planning stages? I know for some particular offices, it can be, you may be able to run maybe just a year of planning, but some may take your whole entire career of what you've been doing in the community to get to that point. So I just wanted to hear your input on that.
My answer would be that it's never too early to start thinking about it if you're serious about pursuing an elected office, right? Because you can begin to start understanding the landscape, collecting friends, Also, getting involved in organizations that you can't show up at the week or the month before the election and expect to be well received. But I would step back a little bit from that, and I would say campaigns are traditionally and typically around or about three individual resources: people, time, and money. And when you've got an abundance of one or the other, you may be able to skimp on one or the other, right? So if you are in a position where you've coalesced a great group of folks who are, native to your community, who are active in your community, who are going to go out there and pound the pavement for you, you might be able to run a shorter race because you're able to mobilize people more quickly. Or if you raise, a ton of money, potentially, not always, you might be able to run a shorter race that's got more intensity because you can afford paid communications. But I would say, the thing that you can't, the resource that is not renewable in that three is time. So I would always start with time and assume that you're not going to have an abundance of the other two. And if you do, that just puts you in a better position.
And it's to the point I made earlier, campaigns are ad hoc exercises. They come together, a group of people who may never work together again in the same way, but they all have a deadline, election day. So the earlier you start planning, the better your chances are of being successful. I've seen candidates that have not won races, in my opinion, not because they weren't qualified, not because they didn't have a good message, but they didn't start in time. They got in at the last minute. Campaigns are exercises in coalition building. You're building coalitions. You're building people to come together and work with you, support you. And it takes time to build an organization. It takes time to build coalitions. So starting early is always better.
Yeah. And now with the advent of social media and everything, I guess the other thing people need to think about is getting their house in order, in a sense. How important is that?
I think the attorney can probably give us an example. But just in the last couple of cycles in Georgia, we've had candidates who were otherwise well qualified, not do some good housekeeping, and someone finds something they posted on Facebook or Twitter several months or years ago, and to make a big enough issue of it, the voters get turned off by it. So I think it's very important. And I think there's probably still yet to be written a set of rules around how much social media will begin to dictate, how future candidates present themselves before they run for office. I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think we'll soon get to a place where either people will look at social media with such a jaundiced eye that anything will go, and I think this current administration, this president, will probably have a lot to do or a lot to say about how far we can stretch the bounds of decency and expectation for candidates to have never said or done anything that might turn voters off in a very serious way.
Well, and I think it's a challenge too, even as you think of yourself as a candidate. How far do you want people to delve into your personal life and
Well, the thing is, when you run for public office, you open yourself up. It's a fishbowl experience. And one of the things this goes to is research. Research is a very important function in a campaign. You should research yourself so you know what issues are out there. You should research your opponents and find out what issues are out there, and hopefully have the judgment to have a sense of what's fair and what's appropriate to interject into the conversation. I always feel like issues are fair. If somebody's voted a certain way, in this last cycle we saw candidates running for Congress who'd been against the Affordable Care Act and then thought it was convenient to say, well, I'm for the Affordable Care Act. I'm for protecting pre-existing conditions. Well, unless you've researched someone's position, you know what they've taken, you may not be able to make the advocacy to make voters say, I don't want to accept that person because they're not being truthful and I disagree with the policy positions they've taken. So research is a very, very important function, but it is a fishbowl existence, and then you don't get into politics if you want to cling to privacy. So whatever you put out there in social media, whatever is out there in your life otherwise in the public domain becomes fair game in the process.
Well, if we do have some future candidates watching, how can they get in touch with you guys?
Easiest way is to email me. I'm definitely a child of this new technology era, but howard@ohioriversouth.com is the easiest way. But I do a fair amount of social media sharing too. All are mostly professional, except for family shots. And I'm on all the platforms, and I'm at I Run Campaigns.
Okay.
Okay.
What about you, Mr. Ross?
My email address, kross@krosspa.com, and my law practice is it's got a website, so it can be reached through that. So I'm not on the social media platforms. I'm an old school
Well,
guy.
this has been extremely insightful, and I'm sure it's going to benefit our members.
Thank you for having us.
You guys have provided some great information. We want to thank you guys for coming out and sharing this wealth of knowledge of how to run a successful campaign. We want to thank you so much for tuning in to Legally Speaking.
And we look forward to you joining us in the future. Thanks.